All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. This is State Representative Salia Israel, House District 50, beaming from Northeast Travis County today. And I'm joined by two really cool people who have a lot of good information to share. We thought today we would have a quick discussion about the economics of COVID and what that might mean for the next legislative session, for the next cycle. We see a lot of people talking about a U-curve recovery and what that means. So it's always good to have a couple people by my side. One is State Representative Donna Howard, who's the senior member on the Appropriations Committee for the legislature. And the other is a well-regarded economist. It doesn't hurt that he's from the University of Texas. So thank you all for joining us. This is State Rep Donna Howard and Stephen Pedigo. And Stephen is with the UT LBJ School. So thank you all for being here today. We're just going to have an economic discussion about COVID and trends that we're seeing and have a free flow of a sharing of ideas. Stephen, for those who aren't familiar, tell us you're with the Urban Lab at the LBJ School. Tell us what that
Sure.
means.
Well, first of all, thanks to both of you for having me. It's great to be with you. I wish we were in person, but one of the great things about something out of this crisis is that we've been able to talk to a lot of different types of people and share lots of different ideas. Yeah. So the LBJ Urban Lab, an applied research center at the school, really centered on issues that are affecting cities across the state of Texas. So issues of resiliency, issues of economic development, things, looking at the built environment, really in the sense of hoping that we can not only develop sort of strategies and maybe practices for helping cities be sort of more sustainable, but also working with our really smart students at the LBJ school. I still am excited every day that I get to go work with these really awesome, graduate students to think through issues that are affecting our cities, and that's probably the best part of the gig, frankly. But that's kind of what we do: ideas and educate policy leaders.
Well, thank you. I'm with you. I know Rep. Howard would agree with me. Whenever we get to talk to young people, it always puts things in perspective for us. And there's some really smart people on the 40 acres. So thank you for joining us. Rep. Howard, we are all looking at a difficult forecast for Texas. We've had a double whammy in that global pandemic, and the energy sector had been struggling already, and now they've hit negative space. So you want to give us maybe a couple of minutes of your economic overview, and knowing people may not realize we're going to come back into legislative session in January, and what concerns you most? Not only, I should also mention you're formerly a critical care nurse, a go-to person for us on issues around public health, and of course that's a big part of not only our budget, but we're in a pandemic. So I'd like to hear your take on issues and the legislature as it relates to the economy.
Sure. And one of the first things I'll say, since you mentioned public health with the economy, is that they go hand in hand. We can't do one without the other. It's incumbent upon us to make sure, as we rev up our economy and get things moving again, that we do it in a way that protects the public health. And there's a lot of tools available to us to do that. Whether we use them or not, or have them all in place, is probably part of the problem here. We could talk about that another time. But, it's really mixed, actually, about the state budget. I know it's going to be a huge challenge. Our economy has suffered. People are out of work. Almost 2 million people have filed for unemployment. There's no question that families in Texas are hurting. So I don't want to downplay that, but I also want to balance it with the fact that we also do have some things that are helping us and will help us to survive this and move forward. And we need to make sure we keep that balance in mind, because we don't want to have people come in and say, oh, the sky is falling, and let's cut. We don't need to do that. Mm-hmm. We actually had when we ended last budget, we were told last session, we were told that we were going to have, with the budget that the 2-year budget we passed, about a $3 billion surplus. We already have $8.5 billion in the Economic Stabilization Fund, also known as the Rainy Day Fund. We know we're going to be already getting over $6 billion from the feds. There's a lot of pieces that we can put together as a safety net to help us weather the storm and move forward. Mm-hmm. The last thing we want to do is look at cuts to education and healthcare. Yeah. Those are critical that we keep those in place. And that's about 85% of our budget right there anyway. Yeah. So if you're talking about making cuts that are going to be significant, it's hard to do that without going into those critical areas. And we know from the 2011 budget cuts, we inappropriately, with a bad revenue estimate, cut $5.4 billion in public education, which we've been working to restore since then. And in some cases still haven't even gotten there. Higher education took a big hit. We never fully recovered from that. So I guess the bottom line I want to say is, yes, there's challenges. The largest part of our revenue stream in the state comes from sales taxes. So clearly those are in a bad state right now. Yeah. Oil and gas, we still have been dependent upon that to a certain extent, but nowhere near like we were before. We're a more diversified state now. Mm-hmm. So though oil is what helps fund the rainy day fund, and we may not have more money coming into that right now as we've been acquiring over the recent years after fracking. The fact is that, we're not as dependent upon it. Mm-hmm. So mixed is what I'm trying to say here. Some challenges for sure, mm-hmm. But hopefulness too, that we can right the ship and we can move forward and we can get lessons learned and get a new economy going that takes into account all kinds of things that I know Stephen's talking about in the paper that he and Kirk Watson put together. And I assume he'll be talking about that. But this is an opportunity to right the ship even better than it was before.
Yeah. Stephen, this is, of course, right in your wheelhouse. If we're looking to the future and you're someone who's maybe graduating from college or about to graduate from college, it's not so simple to say we just have a tech economy, right? That word technology has already infiltrated all of our lives. But I just saw a Dallas Morning News article this morning that said that the hospitality industry, hotel motel, is saying it's going to take us 5 years to recover from this. And I don't discount those experts, but I also know that we need to be thinking about our economic opportunities in a different way.
Sure.
So when you talk about your innovation economy, tell us a little bit more about what that means in a COVID type environment.
Yeah, no. So absolutely agree with lots of things that Representative Howard says in terms that, if we want to build an innovation economy, now is not the time to make cuts in terms of economic development. You identify me as an economist, but I am actually always considered myself as an economic development sort of city strategy guy. And this is the time that, as I'm looking and working with cities across the country, here in Texas, doing some advising as well, saying this is kind of the time that you hold down in terms of the investments that you're making in education and technology, because you're both right. The economy is changing, and for Texas, it's changing dramatically. If you look at the data around the Texas economy, most people sort of think about Texas as a production-based or a production-based economy. Oil, manufacturing, and that's an important piece of who we are. But one of the fastest growing segment of occupations and skills and part of our economy across the state of Texas has been in our innovation-based economy. What my fellow colleague Rich Florida calls the creative economy, the knowledge-based economy. And in fact, if you look at the economy here in Texas, it is really sort of the tale of two economies, right? You've got a service-based economy, which is unfortunately a lot of those lower wage service-based jobs. And as we have really learned in this crisis, we've got to wrap those folks with some better safety nets. And we'll park that for a second and talk about that in a second. But this innovation economy in the state of Texas is growing quite rapidly. In fact, it's the fastest growing, one of the fastest growing segment, frankly. If you look at our metropolitan areas, we are now centers of startups and venture capital, innovation hubs. The Texas Triangle is about 97% of all the venture capital in the state of Texas. It's competing with the likes of like Boston and Seattle and Washington, D.C. and others. And so, we're now viewed as a technology-based economy, much driven by some of our research institutions. UT here at University of Texas, others, the health sciences in Houston, and then the other institutions in our metropolitan area. But for other people for us all to really, take advantage of that requires some upskilling. And it requires us to think about how we get Texans the skills to participate. And so, in the report that Kirk and I write about, we said, well, one of the things to do is we got to invest in Texans. And so that is, that's ensuring our higher education system continues to have the resources that it needs. It's obviously thinking about our K through 12 programs and thinking about how can we, build new CTE programs combined with technology and innovation. But it's also just reimagining what some of our workforce development looks like. And that's better alignment between technology sectors and better alignment with our workforce providers. And that may mean that we have to incentivize our private sector to come to the table to help us do that. And there's some tools and things that we've done traditionally, with incentives and things like that. Let's reimagine, let's get creative, let's kind of redeploy those in a way to really push us forward in terms of thinking about skill acquisition.
Yeah. If anybody's listening, you can type in some questions here on the live stream, and we'll see if we can get those answered. Rep. Howard, you're also on the higher ed committee, have a long history with supporting higher ed, and Lord knows Texas has faltered when it comes to supporting families and kids. But now, as we're looking at people maybe getting retrained or recalibrating themselves, I feel as though community colleges are going to play an even more important role in this in-between time as well. What are your thoughts on training and workforce development?
Well, certainly the community colleges and the technical institutes have been really critical when we have tried to rebound from some downturns. So there's no question that they're going to still play, I think, a critical role in what happens here. But I also am kind of just at a loss to know what to say, because we have so many unknowns right now with higher education, whether it's going to be in person, online, a hybrid. At what point in time is it going to end early, like we're hearing the University of Texas talk about? There's a lot of unknowns right now. What's going to sustain it monetarily? Unlike public education, which is a formula-driven budget that we are basically required to put a certain amount of money into. The formula for higher education is backed into based on the amount of money available, which means that when there's less money, that's where the cuts come. How much are we going to be able to invest, get the state to invest? What's going to happen to tuition and the kinds of supports that institutions are used to when they do a lot of their learning online? We know online is not necessarily cheaper. But people are going to have to look at that differently. What's going to happen now that we don't have international students coming here like we have been, which is part of how we pay for some of our higher education and four-year institutions, our graduate programs in particular? There's so many things out there that we don't know right now. That being said, higher education is going to have a huge role to play, as you point out, in how we move forward and how we retrain, how we recalibrate what we're going to be doing here. You mentioned a while ago, I think maybe it was before we were online, about people coming out with liberal arts degrees, and then what are you going to do? But quite frankly, as a proponent of liberal arts,
Guilty.
The thinkers, the innovators, a lot of them are not necessarily in the field that they're going to work in per se, but given that creative thinking and ability to analyze and to put things together, there's going to be all kinds of new things to think about now. Yeah. This is a time for, as you mentioned, Stephen, the creative economy. This is when we need them more than ever as we enter into this unknown new way of being. So I don't know what it's going to look like, but I know higher education is going to still be a critical part of what we need to do.
Yeah.
Stephen and Rip Howard, let's talk about wages because, of course, a big segment of our economy is feeling the negative effects of this pandemic more than others. Some of that has to do with where they are, how they're housed, the type of job that they have. But for me, I think the Band-Aid has been ripped off when it comes to wage inequity and family security. Stephen, how does all of that fit in when you're trying to challenge a system like the United States government or the Texas government and how we support a different business structure and a different economy?
Sure. One of the things I think that's come out of the pandemic, and I would say this is good, is sort of shining a light on a lot of the inequities of our economy, particularly the way that we have sort of thought about our service-based economy. And in fact, if you look at most public policy debates pre-COVID, right, go back to presidential debate, state debates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What you hear very little about is the idea of how do we make service-based jobs better jobs. In fact, the debate was really about knowledge-based jobs as well as and how that sort of positioned a counterposition to the idea of production or manufacturing-based jobs. But I think what we've learned, right, is that there are a lot of people across the state of Texas that work in service-based jobs. Service-based economy is about 5.5 million Texans. It's growing at about 11% over the last 5 years, so it's fast growing. But the challenge with that is that a lot of those jobs are not paid very well. They come with no benefits. There's no safety support systems. And so one of the things I think that it will be an interesting conversation for the legislature, but also for just residents and citizens and your neighbors is how do we value the work of these service and essential based workers? And that is, are we willing to pay a little bit more to increase wages? Are we willing to make the argument to our state representatives that we need family paid leave, or we need how to create a little bit of a safety net beyond just employer-based healthcare? Because we know, again, that has created, that's a huge issue for the state of Texas and other places, frankly, but even more so here. And so some of the things that Kirk Watson and I write about in our resiliency playbook is, a few thoughts on how to do that. One is, maybe it's time for a state like Texas to think about a geographically indexed minimum wage. Maybe we call for a commission to look at this. I mean, most economists would say that when you adjust the minimum wage for 20 to 30% of the median, in fact, you don't really have any negative externalities on the economy. In fact, that there have been many people, many economists that have come out to say that, in fact, raising the minimum wage is actually good for economic prosperity and good for economic vitality. So that's one. Two, the idea, there's a whole segment of literature out there that has looked at the idea that if you increase wages, you increase benefits, and you service-based jobs better, you get better productivity out of the work. Zeno Tom from MIT has written a lot about what we call the good job strategy, and the need for cities and counties and states to think about the good job strategy. Will the legislature lead on this? I'm not so sure. I do think some of our private sector companies can lead, and that is, I'm not to let the legislature off the hook, but I'm not. But I think that sometimes, with economic development, maybe it's our private sector who kind of pushes our public policy in a way to be a bit leading edge. And so, it's about those safety nets, but it's also the thing that I keep coming back over and over to, even before this pandemic, is that we're a state that has invested lots and lots of resources in attracting outside companies. We have made the attraction game our main arrow in our quiver for economic development. And one of the things that I think we have to do is think about not necessarily investing in outside companies to make investments in Texas, but maybe start making investments in Texas enterprises and Texas residents and the skills of Texans to make us much more economically feasible. Because when we invest in people's safety nets, we invest in wellness, we invest in all of those things, it frankly makes us much more economically competitive. And the data shows that over and over and over and over again. It's just a matter of how can we punch that message through, I think.
Yep. You're off, Celia. We can't hear you.
I said, well said. And it would, if only Stephen had the keys to the castle that we call Texas, it would be easier.
We're happy to run for governor at some point. I'm joking.
And let me throw in quickly too. You know, he's referred to it to a certain extent, but childcare, huge issue now. Everybody sees that, especially when the kids are not going to school, and what that has done to make people see up front and center. Wow, we need childcare. We need quality childcare. We need it available to people so that they can actually work and their children will be taken care of. And then in terms of healthcare, he also referred to that. You know, we've been, just for political reasons, not accepting the Medicaid expansion dollars. That is number one. We need to do that when we get back to the legislature. That would be about $10 billion a year that we could use to help strengthen the safety net of healthcare. If you're not healthy, you're not going to be coming to work. And so we've got to do that. It's way past time. We've been leaving those dollars on the table. Now's the time to go ahead and move forward with that.
Yeah. If I could add 2 points to that, because I think the one point about childcare is really important. I mean, I think what we've learned is that childcare is essential infrastructure for economic development, right? I mean, we thought about K through 12, we thought about skill-based programming as a key piece of our economic development sort of ecosystem, but now, like, childcare becomes really essential. So, you know, it is literally a time for us to reinvent what that looks like. The current model does not work, right? Yeah. It doesn't pay workers very well. It isn't it is not sustainable in terms of providing quality jobs for the people on the other side of that who are providing those services. We know that the business model is not there. So it may be time for us to think about childcare as an essential element of our of our infrastructure around economic development. And then the point that you make about public health is really important, particularly the idea of thinking about public health as an economic development driver. You know, there's a whole body of research out there, particularly that has looked at the role of meds and eds and the revitalization of many communities with looking at healthcare as an economic development driver. You know, the great revitalization story of a city where I spent many of my years was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which really used healthcare as a driver to reinvent itself from being a steel town. And not to say that it's an apples to apples comparison, but for many smaller communities, you know, the thing that you hear a lot about in Texas is urban-rural divide. And we are, let's not forget that we are an urban state more than ever before. But we do have we do have the legacy of being a rural legacy to us. And there are many of our smaller communities that we want to make sure are vital. And one way to ensure that they are developing a economic development portfolio that's just beyond hospitality and local services is to think through the role of healthcare as an economic accelerator. You know, the idea that those institutions become important community hubs, that frankly, they offer a substantial pathway for many people to obtain jobs and skills that are family supporting. And so there's lots of ways to think about how we use healthcare, and particularly those Medicare dollars, as a means to drive economic development.
Yeah. Well, it's I'm going to take one question I've got here. We're getting some good feedback. Rep. Howard, Spencer Schumacher, you might be able to take this one really quick. I know it may take a constitutional amendment, but is there any chance of using the UT System Endowment Fund to cover operating losses for universities? That sounds like another holy term we cannot touch to me.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of rules surrounding the use of that fund, and no, that obviously it will have some impact. It will be able to be used for some things, but there's limits to how it can be used, and also the amount of the corpus that can be touched and dispersed. So there's so much connected to it that it's not going to be able to be used beyond doing I don't want to say small because it's a large amount of money, but relative to what that fund looks like, it's It's not the Holy Grail, no.
Yeah. Another comment from Pam Drake Wagoner. We answered it right at the top, I think, Donna, with your comments, but with us, we're all on the ballot this November. Everybody's taking a victory lap around the public ed expenditures that we made, patting ourselves on the back, but where the rubber meets the road will be, we're going to leave that intact after the end of next session, so that we recognize and learn from our mistakes. In the last economic recession, we cut public ed. And in my opinion,
I cannot imagine. Yeah, I can't imagine a legislator of either party coming and cutting public education with what we just did. I can't see that at all. And we don't know what the November elections are going to show us, but no matter what the election results are, that's one thing that I think is not going to be touched. It was a huge bipartisan effort to get what we got this last session. I don't think there's any going back on that.
Yeah. Well, and especially given what Stephen and the three of us are talking about, which is we need to aim higher, be better, be bolder, be different, and talk about it's okay to talk about things like family supports and daycare and living wage and, my God, healthcare. So these are all big challenges, and I'm excited to be talking about this in a new era. In this January. And Stephen, if you have any last thoughts, we've got about 3 minutes left in our talk. Is there something that maybe a point that you'd like to make that we have not yet made?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I would say is that if you look at the idea of resiliency, right, which is the idea, can communities weather a shock? It's people, it's enterprises, it's businesses. And then you look at the idea of high growth economies. How do you achieve high growth economies? The common denominator between both of those today is the idea of skill acquisition, right? We know that, right? One of the common denominators is skill acquisition. How can you ensure your enterprises get the skills to diversify and be traded sector businesses? How can you ensure your residents can get the skills so they can move up the opportunity ladder? And then how do you ensure that your communities develop that ecosystem? And so, one of the things that I think that I hope comes out of this is the investment back into Texans and really ensuring that Texans not get the skill set and the support to do that. And for a lot of people to say, well, let's just invest in skill training, it's not that easy, right? You also have to have the wraparound services to really make that effective. And what I mean by wraparound services is ensuring that if you're participating in skill-based programs, that you can get the childcare support that's needed. And we know that a lot of our workforce boards do that, but we need to do more of that. How can we ensure our private sector comes to the table? One of the things that I think is still a bit of a challenge here in the state is that our business community is a bit divorced from our workforce development. Now, in some cities, there's been some real efforts about that. Here in Austin, the Workforce Board has done a ton about trying to get the private and the public sector together. But across the state, and generally as a practice or a field, as we look at the world, the world of economic development and the world of trying to create more vibrant communities, we really got to get our public and our private sector to work together. And then, and that's one of the challenges that I think all communities have. And then on the state of Texas issue, not only do we got to get our public and our private sector to work together, we got to get our state and local officials to work together too. Because if we want all of these things of investing back in people and creating these vibrant communities, it's about getting on the same song sheet and playing together in the sandbox in a way that we know that's achievable. So I think that's going to be one of the big challenges, is trying to how do we put the politics things aside and start to think through about how we do this in a way. And I'm glad that I'm not in your shoes to have to do it. I get to just advise.
Well, we got this, Stephen. Don't worry about it.
Awesome.
Rep. Howard, you've always been really good about speaking in terms of families first and family supports, and the state of Texas should be proud to stand up for every part of family life, every component of that family support, however you define family. I got a 94-year-old next door who really needs me. What are your thoughts around what we've been talking about and looking at things in a larger way? It's not just about taking a 6-week course and then the state is done. It's meaty and it's significant.
Well, as we're all talking about, this has forced us to look at things that may have already been there, but that we didn't actually see. One of which is the service economy in particular and how essential it was. Talk about essential services. We wanted those groceries. So we needed the people that were planting and picking and driving and delivering and stocking and putting them on the shelves and then putting them in our trunk of our car and whatever. We needed those folks. And we need to recognize that a large number of those people are undocumented and they provide a huge service to our community and they contribute taxes, despite what some people think. They are a big plus. And we need to ensure that we are supporting that part of our community. But I would go beyond undocumented, just say all of the service economy in that community has been so essential to us. We need to look at everything that Stephen's been talking about in order to give the kind of support system to those folks, because now we actually see how essential they are to us, how interdependent we are. So I think the bottom line is we invest in that infrastructure that we're talking about here, the infrastructure of the human capital and what all that means, but provide the childcare, the healthcare, all of that, what makes it possible, the education makes it possible for us to have the workforce that allows us to have healthy families, equal opportunity, and responsible government, if we allow that to, what my mantra is. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, great discussion, guys. I really appreciate your time. A few weeks ago, in the midst of the beginning of this, I on social media, it's nice to see all kinds of workers getting respect. And I tweeted at one point, I'm glad to see it, but I hope we don't forget them. It's just going to be like, oh, that was nice, and then we move on and try to do things like we did before, and that's not respecting Mother Nature, who's teaching us a few lessons right now. So we'll put up some more resources on our social media. Follow these two fine individuals on their social media. Rep Howard, thank you. I know you got a lot of demands on your time. Thanks for joining us. Stephen, we like to say what starts here is the world when we're talking about the big bad university. So thanks for what you're doing with the future of Texas.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to chat with you all. And yeah, I'd love to do it again.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers.
Bye.
Okay.